I hate math. Can you relate? Or can your kids relate? Does that seem like a fair thing to say about most middle school or high school students in America? Some people think the word math is acronym for this, mental abuse to humans. Does that make sense? The way you learn math, yeah. Or the hard part was when you learned algebra and the alphabet got involved, so Satan said, let's put the alphabet in math. And then, yeah. Or some people, math is okay, but it's just too complicated. Like, why make it so complicated? Just make a simple equation. Why wouldn't it be more efficient to just find out who's complicating it and ask them to stop? That would make more sense. Yesterday I was watching Lord of the Rings, and I forgot about this scene right here where Frodo, he's reading this simple integration by parts from calculus. It's not too bad. It's some kind of Elvish. I just can't read it. So, my name's Andrew King, as Amy said, and I'm a math teacher. I actually don't hate math. Apologize for saying that. But I'm a senior at Cedarville University. I'm student teaching in a local high school, and I teach calculus and pre-calculus classes, and I love it. I think it's really fun. But I have students who say that they hate math. It doesn't make any sense. They never use it in the real world. And so I hear these things a lot. I've got one kid who, in my calculus class, I'll just be teaching something, and he's kind of giving me a blank stare. I guess half the class does that. But this one kid gives me a blank stare. So then I'll stop what I'm doing and say, does this make sense? Any questions? And I'll ask the one kid, like, where did I go wrong? Or where did I lose you? What's the problem? He's just like, I kind of get it. I just don't like math. I don't see the point for it. And that's kind of the way that it was when I was a student in high school, or how it is now for a lot of students. Math may not be the worst thing, they just don't see a need for it, or they don't see when they're going to use it in the real world. They always ask, when am I going to use this thing I learned? And why is that? It's because the teachers present math in this way that you just need to know it for the test at the end of the year, right? So you can look like you've taught something, and the students can look like they've learned something. And a lot of times that's how math is taught. There's kind of a traditional way that teachers present math in a typical class. They present the problem for the day. It's a new topic, completing the square or something, I don't know. They demonstrate how to do a problem for the class. Then, as a class together, they'll do an example, trying to get a feel for it. Teacher will then give, 5 practice problems for them to do before they leave class. Then there's 20 problems for homework. Come back tomorrow with any questions. Start the next class the next day by taking any questions, going over the homework, and then when you're done with that, you do the whole process over again with a new topic, right? That's kind of how I learned math. I liked it. I was okay with it. I'm a pretty orderly, structured person, so having that routine was okay for me. But a lot of kids just don't like that. Or they're okay with it, but they don't remember it when it's taught that way. They kind of say, all right, I just need to know this for the test. I won't think about how I can apply this in the real world. I'll just learn it for the test, and when that's over, I'm done. So then we get all these kids asking, well, when am I ever going to use this in math or in the real world? And they ask that because it hasn't been taught as if it's useful for something other than the test. There's a math teacher that I like. His name is Dan Meyer. He's kind of a young and up-and-coming guy. He realized this problem, and he tried to fix it. He realized that teachers kind of teach math as if they are giving kids aspirin when they don't even have a headache. It's like, okay, I'm just going to shove some math at you, learn it for the test. But the kids are saying, I don't have a need to learn this. What's the point? So the teachers say, oh, it's on the test. Oh, okay, that's the need. But that's not very pleasing to a student. They'll say, okay, fine, but again, I'm never going to use it in the real world. So he sees that teachers just kind of give them this solution to a problem, this aspirin, but there's no headache. So he tries to create a headache and then present this math like aspirin. So he'll start off his classes by presenting a pretty captivating problem, something from the real world that you would actually need math to solve. He's really big into real-world math. People ask him, why are you so into real-world math? And he says, it's because it's the only kind of math. What am I going to teach? Fake math? I don't want to do that to my students. So he gives them a real-world problem, and he asks the kids to take a guess based on nothing but their intuition. Don't worry about the math you know, just take a stab in the dark. And that kind of puts all the kids on an equal playing field, just using their intuition. A smart kid is kind of equal with a not as smart kid, just on a guess, a blind guess. And then he has them struggle through this problem a lot, still not giving them the math that they need to solve the problem, but getting it so that they're just stuck on this problem. They can't solve it. They become fixated on, I need to know the solution. And then when the kid is so frustrated and so ready to quit, that's when he teaches them how to solve it. Introduces the topic, gives the math, and then they are able to solve the problem, and that's a great feeling that they get of being able to solve a problem. Then they want to do another one and practice that new thing that they learned. And it works. Kids learn the material. They do just fine on the tests, even without an emphasis on the tests. They're able to retain it and learn it pretty well the next year. They're able to carry it forward. And it just works when you present it as needing a problem, or that there is a problem that needs to be solved, then the math is the solution. It's a very logical way of presenting it, and it works for these kids. And they found that the harder the problem is, the sweeter the solution felt. If you're just doing exercise problems for homework where all the problems are the same, it's just the numbers are kind of different, kids can figure out how to play the system, figure out what you're going for. But if you just give them like one or two really big problems that's really hard for them to solve, once they solve that, now they're very satisfied. And there's just this feeling of like euphoria from solving a really hard problem. So, why am I telling you about math? You didn't come to a math teacher conference. So why am I talking about math? We should be talking about our Christian lives, right? There's a problem and a solution in our Christian lives. And I think we all know what the solution is. It's God's love for us. It's Jesus' love. We know God so loved the world. God demonstrated his love for us. He's saying, Jesus loves me. And it's great. We celebrate that every week, and we're very grateful and thankful for Jesus' love. But if we know that, why do we always feel the need that we need to be doing more as Christians in our Christian lives? Why do we look at so many Christians and see that they're stale or bland or not applying what they learned in the real world? It's kind of like they learned how to be a Christian so that they could pass the test to go to heaven, right? And now we say, oh, but I'm not applying it in the real world. So why does that happen that way? And I propose that it's because we don't know how bad the problem is, or we don't know what the problem is. Just like in math, if I don't have a problem to be solved, if you're just giving me a solution, if you're just giving me aspirin, I don't see the headache, then I don't see the point in learning it, and I'm not going to remember it or apply it. So we know what the problem is, too, in our Christian lives. It's sin. It's that we have sinned against God. We've chosen to do our own thing. But yet we still don't see how bad the problem is. We know that we all do wrong things. But because there are some people who are really bad, take the school shooters or the sexual predators or whatever, the people who are really bad, because we're not as bad, that makes us okay or decent or not the end of the world. And that's just looking at it through our eyes and not God's eyes. The problem is that we don't look at things through God's eyes. We think that we've got an idea of how our life should be lived, and so we're content with that. We say, I'm pretty good because there are other people who are worse. That's just human thinking, a comparison game, when we don't know God's standards and his ways. There's a song by Bryan I heard on the radio a while back that I thought really summarizes it well, our country's feeling of morality and morals. He says, I believe most people are good. Most mamas ought to qualify for sainthood. Most mamas are good, right? There's nothing bad with any mom. I believe you love who you love. Ain't nothing you should ever be ashamed of. I believe this world ain't half as bad as it looks. I believe most people are good. This is exactly our problem. We say, I'm not too bad because I work really hard at my job, or I'm a parent and I raised my kids pretty well, or I'm just happy that I have kids, and so I'm not that bad. I'm good overall. I'm pretty good, or I'm not that bad. And it's just kind of this thinking that is so prevalent in our country and in our Christian culture, too. And this has always been our problem. And it's been our problem from the beginning of time and beginning of the Bible. I want to walk you through a list of people in the Bible or stories in the Bible where someone showed their sin problem through this fact that we try to make something other than God or someone other than God our king. That's the ultimate sin problem. We think that we know how to do it, we're looking at it through our own eyes, and yet we make someone or something other than God our king. We try to fill that hole with something that just doesn't fit. I want to take you first to John 19 and talk about the chief priests and the scribes from Israel. At this time, Jesus was on trial before Pilate. Pilate was trying to determine if the charges that the Jews were bringing against him were valid and if he should actually be crucified like they wanted him to be. Chief priests and scribes didn't like him. He claimed to be the Messiah, and the chief priests and scribes wanted the Messiah to come because the Messiah was going to free the people of Israel from Roman rule and Roman oppression. And the chief priests and scribes wanted that, but because Jesus was not bringing that immediately, he wasn't claiming to free them from Rome, a lot of these Jews and religious leaders didn't believe he was really the Messiah. And so because he was coming and saying that they were sinners, these chief priests and scribes, even though they were the religious higher-ups, the leaders who thought they were really good, they were offended by this. They didn't like Jesus, and so they wanted him to be crucified. And so Pilate says this, after he's tried Jesus, he tells the Jews, "Here is your king." But the chief priests and scribes shouted, take him away, crucify him." Pilate says, "Why should I crucify your king?" And then the chief priests and scribes answer with this, "We have no king but Caesar." Now, do you see the irony in this? The chief priests and the scribes were the very last people who would ever claim Caesar to be their king. They wanted nothing more than to be free of his rule, to be their own nation again like they were before Rome came in. They could lead the people in the laws of God, and Israel would be their own thing. And so you can see the hypocrisy in their answer. We have no king but Caesar. That's not what they wanted. But they turned to Caesar as their king when they realized that Jesus wasn't the man they thought he was. He wasn't the Messiah bringing them political freedom, and he was actually pointing out their sin. So they didn't like this, and that's why they claimed something other than him as their king. Now let me walk you through this list of people through the Bible that we know very well who had the same problem of making someone or something other than God their king. It starts at the beginning with Adam and Eve. They disobeyed God's one command, right, to not eat the fruit in the garden. Satan deceived them. They ate of the fruit. They made their own desires their God or their king, and they suffered the consequences. They had a son, Cain. Cain and his brother Abel were offering sacrifices to God, and they both knew what God wanted. They both knew what God saw through his eyes. He wanted a sacrifice from the flock, the firstborn of the flock of sheep. Cain was really good at farming and vegetables and fruits, and so he offered the first of his fruits to God as a sacrifice, but God didn't want that. That wasn't what he saw through his eyes. Abel did the right thing, and Cain became jealous, and Cain became the first murderer. Right? We know this story. He killed Abel because he was upset that what he was good at, his desires, wasn't what God wanted. So he made his own desires, his own talents, his king instead of God. Eventually in Genesis 11, we get to the people at Babel who tried to build a tower because they wanted to make a name for themselves. Their desire for popularity and to be well known was their God or their king. And God put an end to it. He said, they won't make a name for themselves, but because they're working together, nothing they do can be put aside. The power of teamwork is very powerful, and they can do whatever they set out to do. So I need to confuse their language and scatter them across the earth, and he put an end to the people at Babel. Eventually, Jacob comes along. He was later renamed Israel. He's the father of the nation of Israel. And he deceived his brother, he deceived his father in order to get his birthright. He ended up having 12 children, and he would kind of play favorites among them, which sowed discord among their family. And it was just a messy situation, including among his son Judah, from whom Jesus would eventually come. Judah sinned with his own desires too, particularly his sexual desires also. He had trouble with his daughter-in-law, and it's created this messy situation among the family where it looked like there's no way Jesus or the Messiah could come from this family. Eventually, Moses became the leader of Israel. He led them out of the nation of Egypt, and he experienced God do all of these amazing plagues on the people, part of the Red Sea to get them out. And there came a point where Moses was about to take the people into the land of Egypt, or to the promised land, and the people were complaining because they didn't have any water. Okay, so they needed water. Through their eyes, they didn't agree with what God was about to give them. God told Moses to strike a rock, and from this, or to speak to a rock, and God would make water come out of this rock if Moses simply spoke to it. Moses didn't agree with that, didn't make sense in his own human eyes, and so he struck the rock. Water still came out of it. God still made it happen, but he punished Moses by not allowing him to enter the promised land. So because Moses tried to look at this problem through his own eyes and make his own sense-making tendencies his God or his king, the people suffered because of it. Eventually, they did make it to the promised land. Israel spent time under judges and leaders who would rule them, and eventually they started to look at the other nations around them, and they saw that all these other nations had their own kings. And the people of Israel said, we want a king too, just like all these other nations. They seem to be doing pretty good. It's hard for us because, yeah, God is our king, but we can't see him, so we'd rather have a king that we can see. And so they made their God, or their king, an actual human king. God said, they have rejected me as their king. I'll still give them one, but they're going to suffer because of it. And they did. Saul was not a great king. King David, we talked about him a few months ago and did a series on him. He was called man after God's own heart. He was really, really good. We kind of see him through this way of looking at people in America where he was pretty good. Overall, yeah, he did a thing or two wrong, but overall he was pretty good. But he had major flaws. He had the flaw with Bathsheba and Bathsheba's husband, where after he took Bathsheba to be his own wife from this man Uriah, he had Uriah killed. And he tried to cover it up, and eventually he was found out to be guilty, and it really set him back, and it set the nation of Israel back. And it caused problems with his children. One of his own sons tried to take over the kingdom from him. That was Absalom. Then he had another son, Solomon, where Solomon kind of followed these sexual wrongdoings. He was told not to take any foreign wives as the king, even though he would have his pick of whoever he wanted, because these women would lead him away from the Lord, these foreign people with their foreign gods. He did it anyways. He made his sexual desires his king instead of God, and they led him away and led the nation of Israel away. Eventually, they were led into captivity, and they spent a lot of time there. Eventually, they were freed, and then Jesus came. Jesus had his disciples who walked with him and saw his miracles and his power. And the most prominent one we usually think of is Peter, the Apostle Peter, who had a lot of good intentions and really loved Jesus, and he would say all the right things. But when the time came to put it into action, he failed, and he was a hypocrite. And we say, how could he do that? We think of Peter saying that he would never deny Jesus. Even if all the other disciples did, he would never do it. And then when he had the chance to stand up for Jesus, he denied him 3 times. And we stand here and say, how could he do that? He saw Jesus. He saw the miracles. He was closer to him than anyone else. And yet he still did it. And we say he's such a hypocrite for doing that. And the chief priests and the scribes, they were such a hypocrite for claiming they wanted Caesar as their king when that was really the last thing they ever wanted. But don't we do the same thing? We look at the flaws in other people and what they do wrong, and we ignore the ones in ourselves. or even if we do admit that we are sinners, that we have our own flaws, we don't understand just how bad it is. But it all stems from making something other than God our king, or looking at life through our eyes instead of through his. The Apostle Paul spoke about this in Romans chapter 1. He paints a picture of just how bad our sin is. He had just, in verses 16 and 17, just explained the gospel, that is the power of God to those who believe, and that it gives salvation to anyone who calls on God's name. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And then he follows that up with the problem of sin. God's wrath is revealed from heaven against all godlessness and unrighteousness of people who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. It says, for though they knew God, they did not glorify him as God or show gratitude. They thought they were wise, but they were really fools. We just think that we have it all under control if we look through our own eyes. But Paul points out that we just miss the mark so bad. We worship these things that God created when we should be worshiping the Creator himself, who created all these things. In Romans 3, there's another long list of quotations from the Old Testament where Paul just cuts them out of spots from the Old Testament and says, look how bad the Old Testament authors describe people. No one seeks God on their own. No one does good. We've all been led astray. Apart from Jesus, we just go our own way to the grave. And we just sin and sin and sin. And there's nothing that we can do on our own to get out of it. In Ephesians 2, he continues it. He says that we were dead in our trespasses. Apart from ourselves, there's just nothing we can do. We were disobedient. We followed our fleshly desires. We carried out the inclinations of our flesh. We followed Satan. He's called the ruler who exercises authority over the lower heavens. We follow his influence and disobey God because we think that we know better ourselves. So now, does the problem seem bad enough? Because even if it does, it's even worse. I'm sorry to paint such a bleak picture, but we continually do what we know we shouldn't and don't do what we know we should. Paul talks about that in Romans 7. He says, I know what I'm supposed to do, but my flesh just doesn't have the ability to carry it out. I know what I'm not supposed to do, but my flesh is just drawn to do that. And it's sin. It's following something other than God, setting someone up other than God as our king, and just trying to look at life through our own eyes like we know what's going on. So now, if the problem seems bad enough, now here's where the solution comes. Just like math, if you've got the problem and these kids are struggling with it, ready to give up, that's when the solution comes in. And now, how sweet does the solution feel knowing that we are so bad that we continually disobey God and want nothing to do with him through our actions, and yet Jesus still loved us. How could he love someone who hated him so much? It just doesn't make any sense to me. But the fact that he does is what makes it so sweet. The fact that he would love someone so far apart from him makes it so sweet. And we should want to share that. It should change how we live. Paul talked to people in 1 Corinthians who had a long history of sin, but they were changed in how they lived after they knew Jesus. Paul wrote that these kinds of sinners would never enter heaven: the sexually immoral, the idolaters, adulterers, homosexuals, thieves, greedy. Those are hard words. We don't like to hear that. But we may fall into one of those categories. But once they knew Jesus, then they were changed. Paul said, such were some of you. You used to be like these people, but you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus. He loved us so much that he saved us from this. And how did Jesus solve the problem? We know it's through his death on the cross and his resurrection. But the Bible says that he became the problem for us. Our problem was sin. And 2 Corinthians 5 says that He who knew no sin became sin, and he took on our sin on the cross, that we might become the righteousness of God, that we might be saved. He became the problem for us, and then the problem was killed because he was killed. He became the problem, he was killed, and therefore our sin was killed along with him. But he didn't stay dead. We know that he rose again, and he has power over the sin that he killed. And that's what makes the solution seem so much sweeter, when we realize that he took on all of our sin. He took on our problem, and he was willing to die along with our sin. And now we serve him. And now the solution just seems so much sweeter. So what do we do with this? How do we change? How do we apply this in the real world? Let me go back to my math example. When I was in high school, going into college, I wasn't sure what I wanted to major in. I just knew I really liked math. I was really good at it in high school. It was the only thing that I really, really liked and was good at. So I decided that I would major in math and see where that took me. I thought that I wanted to go into actuarial science, which is a job that uses really complicated math in insurance. They analyze risk and probability and how likely an accident will happen, and then they charge a certain amount for premiums. But after thinking about that and kind of going into it, I thought, I don't want to do that. It seems a little too hard. I'm not sure I want to have that kind of desk job the rest of my life. But I realized that I really liked helping people with math. People figured out that I was good at it, that I was a math major. So they would come to me with their homework and their problems, and they'd say, can you help me with this? And I kind of did this in high school too. I helped tutor kids on the state test. But I just loved being able to be with a person, see what their problem was, kind of diagnose it, then help them get over it by introducing the math that they needed or the topic, and then seeing them have that aha moment or that light bulb moment where now it all makes sense. This was my problem. Here's where I solve it. This certain concepts that I learned a long time ago but forgot. Now I see how it all connects. And I love just showing them like how math connects and how they can use it to solve any problem they put in front of them. Because I loved math so much because I loved the feeling of problem solving. You just throw a problem in front of me, and it's like, challenge accepted, I could solve this. Because I know math, and I've learned like lots of different areas, and I know how to put them together. And so that's what I try to do in helping these people who would come to me with help for math. So then I thought, that's what math teachers do. Is that something I'd be interested in as a career? And the more I thought about it, yeah, I think I do want to do this. I love people, I love math, and I want to help them love math the way I do and see the benefits. Problem solving, analytical thinking, making money. I made money as a math tutor in high school and in college. I want to help kids see that if they become good at it, they can profit off of it. And I just wanted to share the reasons that math is special to me with other people. And so that's why I've gone into teaching and to become a math teacher. And so in the same way, we ought to teach this gospel that is so special and so important to us. The things that we care about the most are what we want to share with others. But how do we share this topic if it's all about how bad somebody is? How do we come to someone and say, you don't know how bad you are, you will never understand how bad you are, and you need to be saved from it? It's hard to present the gospel in that way. But I didn't try to teach math as, you're really bad at math, here's how you get better. I taught it from a personal standpoint. I said, here's why math is important to me. Or I introduced my problem, that I was trying to solve problems, and I wanted to come up with this solution. And it's just this idea of problem solving. So with the gospel, I can explain my own shortcomings, my own difficulties, and say, I sin in this way. I'm really messed up in this way. I try to do this good thing, but I always fail at this. And then paint the picture of how bad I am, and then point them to Jesus and say, he's what changed me. He's what saved me. And as you do that, people you talk to kind of open up with their own shortcomings and say, oh, he's being vulnerable and willing to share his problems. Yeah, now I think about it, I kind of struggle with that too. And so then they are more ready to accept that they have a problem. Even if it's small, the more that you share about yourself and how it's important to you, the easier it is for them to come along. And so we should share this thing that is so important with us and present it in the context of a problem, that we are sinners, we look at things through our eyes, we make something other than God our King, but Jesus still loves us, and that's amazing. And he has saved us from our sin, and we can claim victory over our sin through him. So what is so special to us and such a sweet solution to such a big problem is something that we can share with other people too. Let me pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your love. We know it, we've always known it, but it's so much more powerful when we see it in the context of our need for you, that we have abandoned you, we've just done everything except for what you want us to do, and it boggles my mind that you would still love me even though I wanted nothing to do with you. Thank you so much for that precious truth. I pray that it would really hit our hearts and really change us, that we would really want to live differently because of you. Help us to remember that you are with us, that your Holy Spirit is inside of us, and that he gives us power to change. Help us to be willing and eager to share this with others, and help us just to continually look to you, to realize our need, our problem, to recognize you as the solution, and to do something about it and apply it in our lives. We love you so much, Lord, and we thank you, and I ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.